In the middle of Willowbrook town stood the oldest building anyone could remember, the Willowbrook Library. It had tall wooden doors, windows shaped like arches, and the warm smell of paper and ink that wrapped around you like a blanket the moment you stepped inside. 8-year-old Sophie loved visiting the library after school. Mrs. Wren, the librarian, always had a smile for her and a stack of books ready. But today, as Sophie wandered between the tall shelves, she noticed something odd. In the far corner, behind a shelf labeled Fairy Tales and Folklore, there was a tiny door in the wall. It was only big enough for a cat to fit through, and Sophie was sure she'd never seen it before. She bent down and peered inside, but it was pitch dark. "Curious, are we?" Mrs. Wren's voice made Sophie jump. "I didn't know this door was here," Sophie said. Mrs. Wren's eyes twinkled. "Some things in the library only appear when you're ready to find them." Before Sophie could ask what that meant, Mrs. Wren placed a brass key in her hand. "You'll know what to do," she whispered, and walked away. Sophie stared at the key. It was warm in her palm, as though it had been sitting in the sun. She looked back at the little door, slid the key into a hidden slot, and heard a click. The door swung open. Instead of a wall behind it, there was a spiral staircase leading down, lit by tiny floating lanterns. Sophie took a deep breath, stepped through, and began to descend. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the bustling library faded until all she could hear was the soft hum of the lanterns. At the bottom of the staircase was a round room filled with shelves upon shelves of books. But these weren't ordinary books. Some had shimmering covers, others glowed faintly, and one even floated in mid-air, slowly turning its pages. In the very center of the room sat a pedestal. Upon it rested a single book with a deep green cover and golden edges. The title, written in swirly letters, read, "The Book of Living Stories." Sophie reached out, and the moment her fingers touched the cover, it sprang open. The pages flipped quickly, stopping at one with her name written in large, looping letters, Sophie Miller. Below her name, words began to appear. "Once upon a time, a brave young girl discovered a secret library hidden beneath Willowbrook." Sophie gasped. The book was telling her story right as it was happening. Suddenly, the letters shifted and new words formed. But before she could finish reading, the library's magic began to fade. Only she could save it by finding the 3 missing story fragments before sunset. As soon as she read the sentence, the green book snapped shut and floated into her hands. A small map slid out from between the pages, showing 3 glowing stars scattered across the underground library. Sophie set off at once, and the map led her to a shelf labeled Myths of the Mountains. She scanned the titles until she spotted a slim silver book with a lock. When she touched it, the lock vanished, and inside was a loose page glowing faintly. She picked it up, and the words on the page whispered, "The first fragment is found." The green book in her bag grew warmer, as though it was happy. And the next star on the map was in the section called Stories Not Yet Written. Here, the shelves were empty, but as Sophie walked along, ghostly outlines of books appeared, waiting to be filled. In the middle sat a desk with a single quill and sheet of paper. Sophie sat down, dipped the quill in invisible ink, and wrote the first story that came into her head about a fox who wanted to paint the sunset. As she finished the last sentence, the paper glowed, and another fragment appeared, this time in the shape of a golden ribbon. She tucked it into the green book. The final star was deep in a narrow corridor lined with dusty scrolls. At the end was a glass case containing a tiny, glowing book no bigger than her hand. A sign beside it read, "To take this, you must give a story in return." Sophie thought hard. Then she whispered her favorite bedtime story, the one her dad had told her about a brave little mouse who outwitted a hawk. The glass case vanished, and the tiny glowing book floated into her hands. Inside was the third fragment, a folded piece of parchment. When Sophie placed the 3 fragments into the Book of Living Stories, the room filled with light. The shelves straightened, colors brightened, and the floating books began to hum softly in joy. The green book opened once more, and new words appeared. "Thanks to Sophie, the library's magic will never fade." She will always be welcome in its secret halls. A soft chime rang out, and the map rolled itself up and vanished. The spiral staircase reappeared, waiting to take her back. When Sophie stepped out into the main library, everything looked normal except for Mrs. Wren, who was dusting a shelf nearby. She winked. "Find what you were looking for." Sophie grinned. "Yes, and maybe a little more." From that day on, Sophie visited the library as often as she could. Sometimes the little door appeared, and sometimes it didn't, but she knew it would always open for her when a new story needed to be found. And tucked away in her backpack, she always carried a green book that sometimes whispered to her at night, reminding her that in the world of stories, anything was possible. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like the video.